Rachel, what has been the highlight of the week?
Yes, I think this will be a fun way to start all of our episodes now.
Yeah.
The highlight of what I have seen out in the market this week is that the market is picking up when it usually slows down. So usually our runway, it's June 15th. We have less than 15 days left of the spring market because the reality is we live in Canada and just people go into summer mode. I've said it a million times, even during COVID when we had the craziest market ever. No one was out. Like they were, but like really not. Like people are on patios, they're enjoying their lives, they're enjoying the summer, right? We have so little time with warm weather. I really looked at the interest rate cut too logically. And we did this, we did a prediction, and you predicted correctly. You said they're going to cut. I thought they were going to hold. I think I was just kind of like over it and pessimistic. I was like, I don't even want to talk about it anymore, and I was just like, really? Because and actually said this morning to a buyer. I said a 25 basis point cut is not an affordability conversation, but it is a consumer confidence conversation.
You got it. It's about perception. Didn't we talk
So
about
now people are feeling more that it's going to go down, that it's not going to go back up. By the way, I'm not convinced it may not go back up. I think that it may be bumpy, but we'll see. I don't think it's going to be this trajectory. I just don't. But we'll see. And there is conversation that Canada is positioned to have more rate cuts in the near future than any other developed country.
I
And
would
with
agree.
the feds and with the feds held tight and they did not move, but they have a whole other set of issues and they have a very, very contentious election coming. And it's a very weird time for the US. I think the reality is that that's a whole other conversation. We could do a whole other episode on it. But yeah, actually I'll just add one more caveat, which I think is a very interesting trend, is I'm seeing a big increase in listings.
So, couple things. I don't want to completely derail. So, the cool thing of this week is we are seeing people out when you thought it would be slower. Let's see what happens towards the end of July when things traditionally start to clamp up. I think that we're going to continue to see a little bit above, nothing crazy, but a little bit above normal activity. But I still think a lot of buyers are going to end up holding off until the next rate announcement because there may be another rate decrease and a
Do
rate
you
cut.
know?
I
I
think
don't know. I got to tell you, my buyers are itching to buy something right now because they know the rate cuts are coming and it's going to get more competitive. I think the ones that have their mortgages approved, that have a budget, are trying to get in now and get what's available, because it's interesting. Like I say, there's a flood of listings, but it depends on where you are. And
and what you're looking for and what you're looking for. Like condos are something that continues to be listed everywhere, which brings us to today's topic. Two things
yes, let's
that
get to today's topic.
today's topic actually covers two things. So if you're thinking about, hey, how can I get into the home ownership space? There are two ways that you can go about it. Save and buy in a cheaper area if you don't have the down payment, or there's another, and actually quite a few different models that are coming to market. One
Sorry.
that has been tried and true and around forever are co-ops. Another type of home ownership model we're not going to talk about is rent to own. And another one that we're now seeing is the equity sharing model. We're not going to talk about the latter two. Let's talk about co-ownership, because I used to come across these when I was looking for myself. I think you and I were even shopping together at this time. And I would find these like seemingly gorgeous condos for like a ridiculously low list price. I thought, oh, they're just listing it to bid. No, they were co-ops, because co-ops are much cheaper than comparable condos. So Rachel, if you can open it up with what you see from just like your buyer and seller side about how they view co-ops, and then we can talk a little bit about like the actual nuances between the two of them.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think there's probably a lot of people who are watching this who have actually no idea what a co-op is.
Should we
I
start
think,
from, do you want me to help
yeah,
define?
no, no. And I think that when I got into the business, I keep saying, like, I don't want to sound like I'm lying and inflating. I don't remember when I got my license, but like over a decade ago, like 12, 13 years ago. Okay. And you talked about co-ops. You would never steer a client to a co-op. So there's a couple of things you need to understand is that um, one is co-ops are priced lower because they don't increase in value in the same way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why? Because when you buy a condo, so we're going to talk condo versus co-op. You buy a condo, you buy that condo. You have exclusive use of that, not even that you exclusive, you own the condo and you have you have common usage to the common elements, you pay maintenance fees to them, but there's an actual like legal pin on your condo. You can buy and sell it. Great.
Your name is registered on title.
Correct. With a co-op, you buy shares into the co-op and you have exclusive rights to use the unit within that co-op. Okay. So that's one. And people would be like, oh, that kind of feels sketchy, right? Like, what if they say I can't use that anymore, whatever. There are legal, you're totally fine from that standpoint. The bigger concern, and one of the reasons also that makes co-ops a hindrance in getting into, is that, and each one tends to be different depending on the declaration, is that you need a much larger down payment. So you can't go with 5% or 10% down or even 20% down. Actually, a lot of them look at a 40% average down payment to buy into the co-op. And that's huge. But you know what's really interesting to me is that if you're saving to put 20% down so you don't have CMHC fees, let's just
Right.
say most people can't afford to do that. But let's say you do. If you look at the difference between what a condo 20% down would be versus a co-op 40% down, you actually probably are not so far off. Because there was oh, and this is one other thing to point out about co-ops, which is the gem of them all, is that they're all located in the highest net wealth neighborhoods and the best school districts in the city. Forest Hill,
Rosedale.
Rosedale, Summerhill, like all of them. Every single one of them are, I mean, actually, I shouldn't say that. I think there are some like on the outskirts of, and in like, I think there's one in Christie Pitts and whatever, but they're not where people might think something that is of lower value would be.
Exactly. So essentially, you get to buy into a neighborhood that's super nice for a fraction of the price. So let's talk a little bit about just like reiterate what this means. Okay, so ownership structure, purchaser obtains ownership of the individual unit. Their name is on title. Okay, that gives you a lot more legal power than the cooperative structure, where the cooperation that you're a shareholder of is a registered owner of the property. Okay, the purchaser doesn't own the unit. And you're right. You're right that you do have a long life, like a lease essentially to
A
lease
life lease,
that
yeah.
you're in, like a life lease, or sometimes it's a couple, let's 99-year lease, what have you.
Yeah.
The problem is, if you think about it from an investment point of view, at the end of that life lease or that 99-year lease or that 20-year lease or that 30-year lease, you're essentially SOL, like you're out, right? And that's why there's a perceived less strength in your legal right and the bundle of rights that come with a registered landowner on title. Your rights are a little bit less, right? Now,
Good question. I don't mean to, but I am like, this is actually a really good question for me because I actually don't know the answer. I have to say, I don't think as a condo owner, and I really think there's a lot of risks when you buy into a condo as well, is, I mean, and I have seen it, oh my God, so many times. Condo boards are filled with people who have the time on their hands to volunteer positions. They're not paid positions. I remember some of the best advice I was ever given in a meeting about condos was, if you ever buy into a condo building, like you buy a unit or more than one, get yourself on the board. Because we have seen condo boards fake low maintenance fees to keep then you end up with special assessments, you end up with, and then all of a sudden you've got maintenance fees skyrocketing. People can't, there's a building at 383 Bloor that is a disaster. Like, I think for a 600 square foot condo there, you're paying like $900 in maintenance fees.
Yeah, and we can
So,
get to that in a second. Like here's one although sort of additional like, legal exposure in a co-op.
oh,
If there's
sorry,
a
didn't
blanket
mean to
mortgage,
derail, but like, I feel like
no, no,
condo
but this
owners
is
don't
about
have so many legal rights either.
but this is about risk, and this is exactly it. So, like that condo owner, for example, can say, "I'm out of here. I'm going to sell my unit. I don't care what you say, co-op board. I don't care what anyone says. I have legal right to sell this, and you can
Fair,
whatever you
fair,
want,
very good point. Yes.
right?" Whereas in a co-op structure, I actually have to get permission from the co-op to sell it, and then they have to vet the person that is going to buy it,
Not
right?
all of them, but most of them. Most of them have a
Most
board
do.
approval. You're absolutely right. You're
Most
right.
do. And so you
Yep.
have to be aware of that if you're buying it because you may think you have a deal, but you may not have a deal. And that like adds like another layer of just complexity. Now, another thing that I find problematic about the co-op world, which isn't necessarily not in the condo world as well, is the fact that taxes are billed to the co-op, one big tax bill. Everyone has a proportionate share to like to actually pay the bill as per your share agreements. What if one person doesn't pay?
Hmm. What happens?
The rest of the shareholders are on the hook. So what happens if there's, let's say, something called a blanket mortgage? So you actually, as someone who's purchasing the shares of a co-op, you can't really get a traditional mortgage.
No.
There are types
No,
of
and sorry,
loans.
that's a good point. Not all banks, A lenders, a lot of, I think TD still does co-ops. But most of them are B lenders.
Yes, that will give something called a share loan, right? So now a share loan will be approved and provided by the lender if, for example, there's no other loans on title, like there's a lot of things that have to be clear. Now,
Yeah.
sometimes these co-ops, especially if they're new, they'll have something called a blanket mortgage on the property. And what ends up happening is if we each pay a piece of that mortgage, right, as a shareholder. Now, what happens if Rachel decides she doesn't want to pay the mortgage? It goes into default. And so if it goes into default, is Rachel just on the hook?
Well, listen, hence the fact that you have to go through board approval. I mean, they're so, I mean, and I always say to people, sorry, not to go off topic, but the
No, no,
reality,
this
when
is
you buy any property, I say it's easier to buy than to rent because they're not looking at you as like, Natalka, are you a good person? You know, or do you pay your bills? I'm selling it. Your money's, if you are qualified by the bank, I don't care who you are, you could be a murderer. I'll still sell it. I mean, I'm being not being serious, but you know, so but it's very similar almost to the renting situation where you have to go into a co-op board and say, I'm Rachel Levy. I'm a lovely person. I've got great credits. I've owned all of these homes. You know, I don't have 8 children that are going to live in this property, you know, like all of those things.
absolutely right. And then also there are certain restrictions that some of the boards and so rather the co-ops have. The co-ops can also only be for creatives. So if you're an artist, there are a lot of co-ops for just artists, which
Or
means
older
you have to be
people.
an
Yeah.
artist.
Mhm.
It isn't against anyone's human rights. They're not discriminating.
Right.
You're not an artist, you have to be
Kind
an
of
artist.
crazy.
Right. And there are also some communities that would discriminate on age, and that is permitted if that co-op is specifically to take care of people over a certain age. So there's like
Yep.
there are situations in which co-ops and even condominiums for that matter can exist with
There are condominiums, yes, that
yes.
are
Rachel,
yeah.
to
Most of
your
them are
point,
life leases, aren't they?
some of them are life leases.
Yeah.
So couple of things. So the big thing is okay, you're actually like leasing the property. When you have a lease, yeah, that's kind of leasing the unit. Yeah, it's got some like legal rights to it, but not super solid as if you actually have the title. Now, having said that, there are many, as to make it confusing, condo corporations that have condos on land leases.
Oh, yes. And by the way, there's more of those happening now that the government, I want to choose my gun. I don't want to come guns a-blazing, but the government, when they say they're going to build
Unit.
homes, I think there's never any detail to it, right? I mean, you know, the whole capital gains tax that the federal government's trying to introduce because they want to invest in home building, but there's no detail behind how they're actually going to build those homes. By the way, they're not getting built. Anyway, okay. So how are they building them? I actually have the most lovely client in the world who I'd love to have on, but she can't speak for the Ontario government, but actually negotiates these land leases with the developers for the
Oh,
Ontario government. She's a wealth of knowledge. So those do happen. So this is how they're creating homes is the Ontario or federal government owns enormous amounts of land. Could be literally right next to your office building downtown. Like there's tons of them. And so they say, okay, great. This is a great parcel of land. We're gonna land lease this to Daniels, right? Daniels. And the great part about it is that they do make sure that in certain designated areas that you have to have like lower income units available and that type of thing. But that's how they're doing it, like with the land leases to these developers. So I'm always very interested. What's the long-term effect for like of that or the
diminishing
repercussions of
value, diminishing value. And there are a lot of also prudent people that bought land in like East End of Ontario, Toronto, God, 70 years ago, etc., that are actually also there are a lot of condos in the downtown core that are land leases. And so what can end up happening after 99 years, the person on title can say, bye, shoo, right? So if you bought a condo unit on a land lease and there's 10 more years left, the value of
yeah,
your condo will also go down. So you have to be very careful, understanding if you have like what sort of legal entity the actual condominium is built on. Is it freehold, meaning they actually own the land underneath it, or is it a land lease in which they don't?
right. And that
So
would also be I mean, this is why you do status certificate reviews and clauses for sure in your offer in any condo. Yeah.
and title searches. And
Title.
title
Yeah.
searches are super important for this. So
Yeah.
really, now let's go back to the whole co-op structure. Another big thing that I find people don't really realize is that there are also a lot of restrictions with co-ops. Pet size, who if you can rent it out, etc. Now, here's the opposite side to that. You're seeing condos getting really sort of wise with respect to their bylaws as well. Rachel, how many times have you seen pet restrictions?
A lot of them just won't let pets at all, for sure. And by the way, I mean, I was gonna say condos have them as well.
I was
I
just
think
gonna say
the
that.
difference probably is that I've seen a condo building have a restriction like weight size, for example. But then the president has a Doberman that's twice the size, or like, whereas I feel like in a co-op, because it's got a different like
Vibe.
it just has a totally different vibe. It
Yeah.
is. Like, let's remember co-op, commune. Like it was a very 60s type of like everyone came, everyone was like, you know, kumbaya, and everybody lived together and they shared in everything, almost like a kibbutz style kind of living.
That's actually what it's like.
Yeah,
That's what it's like.
exactly. And but you know, it's also like, listen, that's one way of looking at it. So you've got there's more accountability. And because everybody approved you to go in, everyone kind of understands and knows who you are. And so they know that your dog is the size that it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But the nice part is that I actually put a wonderful client into an investment property in a co-op in Forest Hill, and like one of the people on the board like was responsible for doing all the gardens, and their gardens were gorgeous. Gorgeous.
And that's another key difference is very often in co-ops, actual members sometimes may be tasked with caring for the property,
Yeah.
sometimes not, sometimes and we're seeing more often now than most is that co-ops will also have just like a condo corporation. They'll contract out to a management company to like manage the property, for example, right? So that's very kind of like the same, right? And it's
They're evolving. I think they're just evolving. It depends on each one of them, but I agree with you. They're not like they used to be. Yeah.
yeah, but there's still, to your point, Rachel, some that are very like, no, the board members will be responsible for that.
Yeah.
There's also another big difference that has to do with reserve funds. So I'm all about reserve funds. If you're buying a condominium, it is so important to know, is there money stashed away to build, like to pay for the big capital costs? I have
Right.
seen people purchase condominiums in which a big thing had to be like the roof, the whatever, a huge capital structure had to be changed, and there was not enough money in the reserve fund. What happens? Well, each individual, on the as the per their proportionate share for that they pay for condo fees will go a hell of a lot up in order to put money back into the reserve fund. That's big, and sometimes it can just be like one big check that you're going to have to write. Condominium Act does require that monetary fund to be established to maintain the building. I actually think that's a good thing because you
Oh,
won't
for
have like,
sure.
it's like savings, right?
Well,
For
then have to have it, sorry, it has to be, it has to, sorry, the reserve fund study has to be done every 3 years.
I think 3 to 4 years, something like
Yes.
that. I don't recall
So
exactly.
it just doesn't go unchecked.
Yes, yes. And so like, which is fantastic. You want to make sure you have the right person doing it. In BC, actually, the rules are quite different from Ontario, but nonetheless, a reserve fund has to exist and you have to have professionals actually determine
Right.
whether or not the reserve fund is sufficient.
Right.
Phenomenal, required. Now, there's no legislation in a cooperative, however, requiring a monetary fund for maintenance. Having said that, people are logical. So most of these co-ops do actually have do have requirements to set it aside. There's
Right.
no overarching law saying you must do it, unlike the condo situation, but again, most cooperatives do. So if you're looking at a co-op, I pay attention to whether or not there's a reserve fund and how they manage it, right? And whether or not there's a constant audit that goes on, similar to that of a condo corporation.
And there are lawyers that actually specialize in co-ops. There aren't a ton of them. So if you go to your standard real estate lawyer, most of them don't do it. And there are people that specialize in it because it's not a status certificate that you review. It's called I can't remember. There's another name for it. So going back to our original conversation, I think, which is like most interesting to most people, is like why someone would want to go into a co-op, and that would be the price.
Yeah.
So if you look at, there was one that sold recently in Forest Hill. It was a 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. I want to say it was like 600 square feet, and it had parking. And it sold for $429,000. So someone tell me what you can buy for 429,000. You can't. You cannot even buy something that's under 500 square feet. I have a condo coming up next week at Young and Eglinton in a new building, and the stuff that's under 500 square feet is selling for like 560. So now you've got a 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and parking. This other one didn't have a locker or parking. So your price point is incredible. I put this, so my client bought this investment property. It's a 2 bedroom, 1.5 bath, but 2 bathrooms, parking, in the heart of North Forest Hill. We got it for 618. Like, okay, I might be a little bit off, but like low sixes.
Wow.
Low sixes with parking.
Wow.
So, right. So, you can't, you just can't find that type of value. So great. So now you have to say, fine, well, that's great, Rachel, but I still have to come up with 40%. Yes, I get it. But if you are the thoughts, this is where I see the opportunities. One would be, I think these are great opportunities potentially for downsizers.
I
So
would
that's my perspective on like for like a co-op of someone who is looking to downsize from a house to a condo. In my parents' generation, they could sell and they could get into a condo, and that delta was so big that you could get into a really nice size condo and you could have money left over and put in your retirement fund, and you could live off some of it. Although recently we are seeing one of the biggest delta in prices in quite a while between detached and condos as the condo market softens, it eventually won't last. The reality is it won't. So because the co-op buildings are built in older days, so you've got bigger units, you can buy something that's 1,200, 1,400 square feet. And yeah, you might say, well, that's a lot. Well, if you're coming from a 3,000 square foot house, it's really tough to let go of your backyard. I've watched so many downsizers of my clients. It's so tough. Like, where to put all your stuff? Where are you going to store it? And they don't have their backyard, and they don't have their kitchen. And so you can now have even more money potentially if you financially can't get into something. bigger in a newer building and you go into a co-op because you know what, at the end of the day, are you going into something you need to be so worried about the long-term investment of? It's not going to lose you money. It's just not going to see the same increase over 10, 15 years as you are going to see in a condo. That's where I see the best, really, because those people have the 40%, or someone who's put together a decent down payment and says, you know what, I'm not getting anything for my money.
Yeah. So another person would be I sold everything. I have tons of cash left over. I might as well buy this unit because my I'm not getting maybe the same rate of return having the money in the market. So the delta between my actual mortgage versus what I'm getting in the market is like zero, right?
Yeah.
Or very little, which is actually happening for some right now. Like for example, you may be paying a 6% mortgage and you have your money invested at X bank and you're 10%, you're actually negative. You're better off not having a mortgage because your money, you're paying more money out in interest than you actually earn at the bank, right? So in that situation, maybe it's just not worth it, right? So maybe it's just better to park your money there. And who knows, like, what would you say, Rachel, would be, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you know this, the average return over like a 5-year return. Like, so condos would like they return X%, would you
It's
know?
really hard. So I have to tell you, it's really hard. And we talked about this in another episode. Like, we've seen an overall increase of Toronto real estate over 10 years be double. So over the last, I think, 30 years, we have seen real estate double every 10 years.
Right, right.
Better. So that was English this time. And because of the increased value that we saw during COVID and then that correction and this kind of slow climb out of it and uncertainty, I don't think we're going to see that. And then to complicate the answer is condos have been all over the place. So, you know, I think I think that it would be the kind of question you would give a stockbroker and say, well, what do you see like tech stocks versus like finance stocks return to you? And the challenge is that they are, they fluctuate with every possible election plague that we have, pandemic. Oh, my dog's here to visit now. You know, I, I would tell you that you will, based on socioeconomic and immigration like trends, that
Mhm.
you will see a better return on single family homes than you will on condos.
And then in that vein, if you end up investing in a co-op, you're likely going to have some return. And so if you're someone that doesn't need the banger outcome, you're 88 years old, you're 70 years old, you don't
You're
really
not
like
buying for
need the
investment.
money, you're fine, you have the cash to put down because you don't have to go through the hoops of getting a share loan for this. Maybe you just grab a spot. And if it's about living somewhere that you want to pass down to your kids, as opposed to it being an investment, like a total investment play, then
Yeah.
fine, right? That's the place to go. Also, let's say you're in your 40s, you have the cash to pay, let's say 50, 60%, right? On that, like that's yeah, a whole whack of dough, I get it. But let's say you plan to live in that area for at least 15 to 20 years, you still will make money and you're not paying the interest, right? Because, again, like you have to take a look at the fact that when you buy something,
Exactly.
leveraging, what are your costs?
Yeah. No, it's not an investment play. Like my client who bought it as an investment her situation was different, not to get into it, but it's not an investment play. The numbers don't work. There's no question. And it wouldn't be, but someone who, for example, again, 21 Dale is a destination building. It's a co-op building. It has, if you ever want to look it up, I think it was called the Kensington Grounds or Gardens or something originally. It's got an amazing history. I have a condo coming up there this fall. And think about it. So it's right in the heart of Rosedale. And you think, okay, well, I had this spectacular house in Rosedale and I want to stay in the neighborhood and it's surrounded by like award-winning gardens, got an indoor and outdoor pool, a concierge. It is like Palm Royale, okay? Like it is just spectacular. I would move there. Like if I was someone who lived in Rosedale, I don't want to change my life. Our whole lives are about what we do, like every single day. Those are my grocery stores. This is how I get to here. This is how far I am from my kids and my friends and whatever. I can just move there and I can get so much more for my money. So that's where and probably why we see an average of an older demographic in co-op buildings. I think this came up as a topic for us for leverage was just that from affordability standpoint, if we'll get into this in our next episode just about like the fact that Francis Donald of Manulife says this is gonna be yet another decade of unaffordability. Like it'll take another 10 years. And
If
we all know like 6 months, so much can happen. So it's I don't know a lot of people, like I'm not disparaging her, but I'm much more in the depths of to call it, but I think it's pretty bullish to call anything for 10 years. I mean, we don't know what's coming around the corner, but having said that, if for 10 years and you want to get into the market and you want to say, listen, rent is 100% interest. That's the reality, right? Rent is 100% interest, and it's a cheesy thing that lots of realtors say, but it's true. So if it was my child and they had enough money to buy a co-op for a condo, just get into something. You're gonna have to take the money out. Yes, it may be a little harder to go, but if you buy in a good co-op building, you should have no problem at all.
What I would be interested in doing is also taking a look at the co-ops that exist in New York. So if you're thinking
There's so many.
and they're valuable and very valuable. And so my point, I do actually think co-ops are an investment. I do. It just
Interesting.
it depends on there's my kiddo. Hi. Yeah.
We have been visited by a husband, a dog, and a child so far.
Exactly. And I might actually bring her for the end just to say,
yeah, you have to.
And for myself, I'd get her a co-op. I'd get her a co-op over her being rent, right? Any day of the year. And so I do think they are an investment if you have a long enough time horizon, because I do see that I just take a look at New York. What ended up happening to the co-ops? They are expensive, right? They are expensive.
Well, and
now,
that's the idea is like, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I was saying like not crazy, but they're still expensive, meaning that you can get a return. But if you're looking at this as a pure, I want to live somewhere play versus an investment play, which a lot of people argue for, like you shouldn't look at real estate as an investment, but rather as I have thoughts on that. But rather as a place to live, then it's a place to live that's pretty secure, right? In a good community.
Right. No, right. I going like again listening to Scott Galloway's podcast this morning in between showings, and he had this wonderful young millennial on, and the more and more you hear, so to tie this into what you're saying about New York and co-ops and why I thought this is where I think there's a trend coming again, 10 years, 20 years, whatever that is, how long it takes, is they were talking about how that generation is giving up on this idea of American dream of owning a home. Like you said, they're like, well, I can put my money into a house. Am I really getting the same return? Like this whole idea of like telling people that they can only build wealth by owning real estate. And here's for all the trolls can say, like, I'm not saying it's for everybody, right? As a realtor, it's not for everybody to buy, to say, well, if it's so unaffordable, and it's going to continue that way. And we've got a younger generation who can't afford to get into the market. But then we've got these co-ops. And does that become this secondary? I mean, 5 years ago, I would tell you no one was touching B lenders. Like you were embarrassed to tell someone that you got a B lender. But now there's a ton of people who are getting, and they're like, so everything evolves. And I think there's great value and they're great for some people. And if you want to know more about it, reach out to either of us about co-ops. I think really some of those buildings are gems. But now, okay, we have to bring your delicious daughter.
I'm going to bring her down because you know what? I would buy her a co-op, like I said, any day over the year over her renting. I'll bring her down too.
Truly, I would.
Say hello for some time then.
Here she comes. I haven't seen her in so long. She was so small the last time I saw her. I'm definitely not coming around with my cold right now. Oh, now I'm hosting all by myself. Hello, everyone. Oh,
Hi.
Look how big, she's like a person. The last time I
Like,
saw her,
cutie
she was tall. Hi,
pie.
cutie pie. Boy, she really is a mix between you and David.
She is like her skin.
Really is. And I very rarely see that, but she really is a mix between you and David.
I can't believe that people can think that because I looked very different as a kid versus now.
Oh, me
And
too. Oh my God, me too. Okay, well, I wish you guys a great day. Happy Father's Day to David.
one other last thing that I want to say is that let's do a quick prediction. I believe that co-ops are going to actually be another vehicle, just like rent to own, just
Yeah,
like first,
I
just
agree.
third equity will be another vehicle to get into the home ownership space. And there's no shame in that if that's the way you can go.
I totally agree. Maybe get it now. Who knows?
Yes, exactly. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so
You
much for
too.
your flexibility too, Rachel. Appreciate it. See ya. Bye. Bye.